Welcome to the Food Marketing Nerds Podcast.
Some entrepreneurs don't know when to get out of their own way and bring in the next level of expertise, and growing a business from 0 to 100 million and then beyond that is something very different.
Welcome to episode number 40. This is Alex Osterly, and today we're talking with Koel Thomae, who's the founder of Noosa Yoghurt. I'm sure you've seen the Noosa brand in the thousands of stores that they're in across the country, and today Koel discusses what it was like growing the business with an extremely tight budget. Before partnering with an investment firm, Koel and her business partner had bootstrapped their way to a projected $100 million a year in revenue. And everybody loves to talk about big investments and overnight successes, which is why I wanted to dig into the early years of Noosa and what it was like growing the company in the early stages to where it is now. In this episode, you'll learn how flexibility in your growth strategy can actually be a good thing, why tactically picking your retail partners is essential in scaling a food startup, how to market a brand with a small team and a small budget, and plenty more. Koel, thanks so much for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good day.
So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you came into founding the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually just sort of getting my start in the food industry. I was working for a startup beverage company called Izzy. And it was during that time that I had gone back to Australia to visit my family. I'm originally from Queensland, which is the most northeastern state in Australia, and was visiting my mum, and we had just been walking back from the beach and stopped in at this just little local corner store. I saw this tub, and it was clear, and there was no branding on it, but it had this pop of passion fruit puree, which is, if you've never seen a passion fruit, it's like when you cut it open, it's this like very bright orange color, and it's got black seeds in it. So it's definitely very visually arresting, and my favorite flavor growing up in Australia. And so it piqued my interest. I picked it up and discovered it was yogurt. And a few minutes later, I was back at my mum's place having my first taste. And it was just one of those stop you in your tracks taste experiences, like eating, the best Palisade peach on a summer day type sort of moment. And I just started gushing to my now husband, and he's used to me being sort of just generally excited about food. So he's like, "Oh, it's good, but it's just yogurt." And I was like, "No, you don't understand." And then ultimately, I was sharing the same story with my mom a little while later, and so she said to me, "Why don't you call this company?" And I said, "What?" And tell them that their yogurt's delicious. And she said, "Why not?" So I ended up contacting this Australian company to learn that they were a small family business, just sort of getting started, and sort of, asked them, had they ever thought about doing anything, from like a licensing or, doing anything outside of Australia. And they're like, "Oh no, we're way too busy." So headed back to Colorado after that, and just really could not get this yogurt off my mind, and started sort of doing my own sort of research thesis on the yogurt category, and really sort of truly just seeking something that tasted similar. And there was nothing. And so fast forward 2 years later, I was headed back for another visit to Australia, and my boss at the time at Izzy, Drew Grumhouse, was like, "Will you please just contact this company again, because you're driving us all crazy talking about this yogurt." And 2 years is a long time to be, just so fixated on something. So I ended up having my mum contact this family the second time, and ultimately met them at the local surf club over a few beers, as you do when you're in Australia. Ultimately convinced them to license the recipe to me. So, I walked out of this meeting with a very sort of informal recipe and license to this recipe, and got back to Colorado again, and very bullishly wanted to build my own facility and launch this dairy brand with absolutely no experience whatsoever in dairy. It was sort of on the search for a good milk supplier, and had gone down to the local health department and walked out of this meeting with what they call the pasteurized milk ordinance. And it's this massive, very technical document. And I was almost in tears, because I was just like, this is never going to happen. Dairy is highly regulated. It's much more complex than I really realized. But that sort of pivoted my sort of thought process. I was like, okay, I need more than a milk supplier. I need a great dairy partner to help me bring this concept to life. So I sort of started on that search, and I was just in a local coffee shop, and I saw this flyer for this family farm in northern Colorado. Great story, fourth generation, growing all of their own feed, not treating their cows with growth hormones. And I was like, I'm calling them. So I ended up contacting them and connecting with farmer Rob Graves, who's the owner of Morning Fresh Dairy, and convinced him to let me sort of come up and pitch the idea to him. And so, we met basically in the paddock over the cows. He thought I was a little crazy, and I ultimately got my mum to ship in samples of the yogurt so he could taste it. Obviously, tasting is believing, and got Rob to taste the product, and he had that similar sort of, taste moment where he was like, this is not yogurt. I was like, right, So I think it's a pretty, really interesting story in that two complete strangers came together, really bound together by this taste moment and this belief that it was unlike anything else that you could find in the U.S. And so we created a partnership and got busy. And as in business, many things take longer than you ever anticipate. We had sort of connected in 2008, and we didn't launch until January of 2010. So that was when we first came onto the market.
So had you always known that you wanted to start a company, or was it just tasting that yogurt you had that experience that this just had to be available to the rest of the people in the U.S.?
I grew up with parents that were sort of a little bit hippie-ish, sort of had that wanderlust. My dad's Canadian, my mom's American, and we ended up in Australia. I'm the only one in my family actually born in Australia, but, they both really sort of followed their own passions and through that created their own businesses and, nothing to the scale of what we've been able to create with Noosa. But I think having parents that did follow their passion and have their own businesses and, really instill in me that you do need to have a great education, but, don't be afraid to go out there and travel and experiment and find something that makes you truly happy. And I think sort of having that sort of foundation, I was always thinking of ideas and, I definitely didn't have this linear path into food, but once I really sort of got to Colorado and realized that, I was maybe not going back to Australia anytime soon and needed to sort of figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, it really came down to just really thinking about like, what was I passionate about? And food has always been that common thread. And here I was living in Colorado and basically the natural food meccas. I think there was always that spark, but it took time and sort of finally getting to that place where, a lot of different sort of intersections and creating that sort of right moment.
A lot of the articles that I've read, and I feel like just in general, people love to focus on the success story after all of that hard work and all the grinding and the years of not paying yourself is actually in the past. So when you were actually founding the company back in 2010, what was it like when you were bringing it to market and actually starting to scale? And what were some of the tough learnings or keys to success in those early stages?
I mean, there were so many different learnings and sort of tough learnings. Again, I was a first-time entrepreneur. Rob definitely was very deep in the dairy industry, but very focused on just a small territory and something that was more traditional, fluid milk and bottled milk through home delivery. So I don't think we ever really sort of thought of this as, we're going to launch this company and have this national brand. But we knew that it was a proven concept in Australia and that there had to be, more than just Colorado consumers that could fall in love with the product. We were really bullish in the beginning. We built and bought our own manufacturing facility, and that certainly allowed us to scale and ramp up when opportunities sort of presented themselves. But then as that success grew, we definitely sort of hit these just capacity roadblocks because we couldn't, either afford to buy equipment fast enough or, expand the facility fast enough. So that was definitely challenging at different points in the process. I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks we had was we hadn't sort of sat down and really sort of formally decided how we were going to grow the business outside of Colorado. And you kind of get giddy that, every opportunity is a good opportunity. And we had a retailer in the East that was potentially interested and then ultimately decided to pick us up. And we thought it was a good opportunity, and it wasn't. It wasn't the right retailer. It wasn't the right demographic. Our supply chain wasn't sophisticated enough at that point in time for us to be shipping all the way across the country. So there were a lot of different challenges there that ultimately we didn't succeed. And, about 9 months later, we actually pulled out of the retailer by our choice, just because we were just hemorrhaging money, and it was our own money. So that was even tougher. And it was a long time before we could actually go back to that retailer and represent ourselves and have that success point. But it did make us sort of stop and think about how we would grow successfully. And rather than, every opportunity, just thinking more thoughtfully around, is this the right retailer, the right consumer? Does this fit into our overall marketing strategy? Are we able to support it? So I think it was learnings like that that really allowed us to think smarter about how we would grow.
So how did that influence your growth strategy after working with a retailer that's nowhere near Colorado?
Yeah, it just a great sort of turning point and sort of really inflection point for us to become that national brand was in 2012. Target actually came to us and said, we'd love to test you in our Super Target formats. And wow. Because I had experience with Target from my Izzy days, I knew this was a game changer from, this national landscape. And they were all in. So we really felt this level of partnership that they were going to, take, we only had 5 SKUs at the time, but they were going to take all 5 SKUs. They were going to, give us great position on their category. And really wanted to partner with us. And I think that was sort of a big key in who we decided to work with, is that, we were still this very small, unknown brand, and we needed people to be a partner and give us the right runway and allow us to sort of test and learn. And Target really was that retailer for us as far as, a national footprint. But it also, from my experience, I knew that for us to succeed in Target, we had to sort of put other things on hold because they do have a very sort of demanding supply chain process. And while I had lived through it, a lot of people on my team had not. So it was really understanding, the right retailers, being able to sort of say no to other opportunities to make sure that we were focusing and really doing that partnership justice.
How did that relationship with Target develop or get started? Did they reach out to you, or had you met them or reached out to them? They
actually reached out to us. We had been out at Expo West, which most people know in the food world that's the largest natural products trade show in the country. And we actually decided not to exhibit for the first 2 years. Again, just wanted to really sort of iron out those kinks before we sort of said hello to the national playing field. And it was there that Target discovered us. And I think they'd also seen us at a smaller retailer in Minneapolis. And they just fell in love with the taste of the product, realized that it was very unique. And I think we're very forward-looking in the sense that the whole category was sort of exploding with Greek largely driving that, but wanting to sort of be ahead of the innovation curve and the trend curve and really sort of saying, well, what's going to be next after Greek? And so sort of rolled the dice with us as a sort of very small, unknown brand. And because we really understood the supply chain piece of working with them in a partnership, we did a great job. And probably 2 months later, after launching in their Super Target format, they actually came back to us and said, we're really pleased with the early results and how our guest is responding to Noosa. We'd love to roll you out to another 1,000 P-Fresh stores. And, again, I sort of had to sort of bite my tongue and not say an immediate yes, like get on the phone with Farmer Rob and be like, okay, can we actually make this much yogurt? And again, he was like, we can, but you have to stop selling to other customers for a while. So I think, again, just, understanding those, from that learning in sort of the early years, learning that this was a game changer, the right retailer, the right consumer, and that to go all in, we had to say no to other opportunities at that sort of point in time.
So had you guys developed a strategy or a goal of where you wanted to be Once you guys started getting traction and figuring out, wow, this is actually working. If it was, okay, the sky's the limit, or it was like, well, now we have this opportunity, so this adjusts our strategy in this way.
It was a combination of both. I mean, we certainly had a lot of inbound interest, but we were also actively going out there and trying to create those opportunities. So once we got a foothold so we expanded into Whole Foods in Southern California. So all of a sudden you've got this opportunity because you're in distribution in this region. You've got sort of the premier retailer carrying you, but then looking at the retail landscape in that area and saying, okay, who are all these sort of what we would define as the A retailers, great partners, right consumer, and going after those opportunities and really sort of filling in that region. Because as we sort of thought about marketing on a very limited budget, but thinking about marketing in the sense of, if we're going to put any sort of real sampling program into that market outside of in-store, you have to have enough density of retail presence to really make that investment worthwhile and get that return. So that's sort of how we started thinking about it is, if an opportunity opened up in a great region, try and go and fill that in with all the great retailers in that area to be able to really think then, how can we do some interesting marketing programs to, build that trial and awareness.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, as a startup, marketing budgets are usually pretty tight. You still manage to scale quickly. Do you have any pointers for our listeners who are in that same position that are looking to do the same thing as far as scaling?
It's interesting. 2010 was definitely a really exciting time as far as how you could connect with directly with your consumer. But as sort of this one-woman marketing team, I had to be really smart as I sort of thought through that, because we really had no budget. When you spread yourself too thin, you don't do anything well. So it was really recognizing the sort of opportunity of social media platforms. And I was like, I think Facebook is the one. I'm just going to focus on Facebook and do it really well. And that was before, Facebook really had this pay-to-play model too. So it was an interesting time that it was more just your time versus having to invest dollars so your, fans would actually see your post. So we sort of were able to leverage that in the sense that really connecting directly with those consumers, and every post was responded to. I definitely sort of realized that there was also this unique opportunity with this direct connection to really embrace people that were as excited about Noosa as, I was from that first sort of taste moment. And, I would try and connect with them directly and say, if you're willing to send me your email address or your mailing address, like I'd love to send you a coupon or a sticker or a T-shirt. And also, obviously, with food, tasting is believing. So realize that there was, that's where we would have to invest a lot of our initial budget. I would say you have to be willing to really put yourself out there. I mean, in the early days, I was part of that sampling team. So I was in the grocery store. I was at the farmer's market every weekend, making those direct connections. And you have to be willing to put in the time and energy when you don't have a large budget. So I think those were sort of some of the small things that we were doing that really had the power of word of mouth, for somebody to say, oh, I actually met the founder when I was at the farmer's market. And being able to tell somebody else, I think, goes a long way. For me to be that person interacting with people on Facebook at the time, I think also was really powerful in sort of creating that word of mouth. And word of mouth has been huge for us without that big budget.
Well, it's clearly paying off for you guys and has paid off. Had you had marketing experience in the past?
I had a marketing degree, but never had really done anything of a true value with it. As I was truly trying to break into food, my resume looked, I guess, sort of spotty to most people because I had worked as a waitress, I had worked for nonprofits, I was working in an IT company at the time. But once I got into Izzy, even though I was working in the operations team, I really was so excited and saw this amazing opportunity working in this small startup to learn sort of all facets of the business. So I was very bold and basically asked to sit in on any meeting that they were willing to let me. And they did. They were amazing to sort of just say, if you can get your job done, you can do anything else that you want in the company. So that was a great grounding for me from not just marketing, but sort of all facets of the business.
Well, you guys are clearly doing something right. You had Target reaching out to you, and then through your exciting growth, you also had a private equity partner take a majority stake, making a majority investment. And correct me if I'm just making assumptions or glazing over any of these facts, but what was it like getting that first call from your current private equity partner?
Well, we actively went out looking for these people, and that was primarily motivated by the fact that we were running the business so leanly, had never taken outside investment. I had my first child, so there was, added complexity in my life. And we were starting to actually see some direct competition coming directly, at us. And Rob and I both took a step back and were like, oh my gosh, we've actually created a real company, a real business. And that growth curve was not slowing. And we realized that it was a good time to look at taking on an investment partner to really allow us to think bigger, smarter, faster. So it was a very thorough process because we both wanted to stay engaged in the business and wanted to find that right partner who really just understood what we were about, and that was making bloody good yogurt. So didn't want somebody that was, really coming in to sort of cut corners on the quality of the product. And we ultimately, it was interesting as we were going through the process, actually hit our first, major capacity constraints. And so as we were trying to, finalize things with, a potential partner, and we sort of narrowed it down to two groups, this happened. And it was horrible timing on many different levels, and we needed to be transparent and sort of sat down and had this hard conversation with these two different groups. And it was ultimately Advent that we partnered with, and it was from that sort of hard moment that I realized they were the right partner because they asked the right questions. They weren't hysterical about, the issues that we were having. They were like, what can we learn from this? How do we not do this again? And just fundamentally, they were like, you have to deliver on every level, but fundamentally quality was key in their mind. So it's been tremendous for us, for both Rob and I, because I think it's really allowed us to refocus on what we do best. For me, that is, obviously being out there and being the face of the brand and helping with innovation, which is what I love to do. And for Rob, he continues to sort of geek out in his pharma engineering world. But he for me is the gateway of our quality. And so to have him constantly involved on the production side of the business has been key as we grow.
I'm sure it's a culmination of things, but is there a specific instance or a time in your mind where you and your business partner had the realization that, okay, we need some outside financing, or we need some more funding here?
Yeah, I mean, we both had, obviously the smarts to keep growing this and driving it. But I also think we realized that the business was on this sort of trajectory to do over $100 million in revenue, and really proud of sort of getting it to that point, but realizing that through, my experience, even just at Izzy, that some entrepreneurs don't know when to get out of their own way and bring in the next level of expertise, and growing a business from 0 to 100 million and then beyond that is something very different. And I think we both agreed that we wanted to protect what we had created and that we needed, people that had done this before in that sort of next level to get ahead of that, because we were already sort of behind in the sense that the business was being run so leanly that we were sort of opening ourselves up to some real challenges. So I think just being a little bit smarter about looking into the future and knowing that finding that right partner could take time, we wanted to get ahead of that.
So how has your role changed over these past few years?
I am having the time of my life. And it's not to say that I didn't have the time of my life sort of in the early years, but a lot of pain and suffering and heartache. And, that just daily grind has really been sort of shared in the sense that, when we brought on our investment partner, it was still me and one other contracted person running sales. So imagine,
Wow.
we're a $50 million plus business sort of with this run rate to over 100 million. That's a lot of moving parts. I had a very small marketing team. So, and I don't want to put words in Rob's mouth, but for the fact that both of us have been able to find great people that are as passionate, if not more passionate about the brand, to sort of help run it to that next level, but still be involved in that way that the brand is not losing its essence. And I think that is so key. Even like simple things. I mean, I was sitting in a marketing meeting and it's like, I don't think that's brand standard. And just to be able to like have those guardrails and be having fun is truly a very unique opportunity.
So what's next? What's on the horizon for you and Noosa?
So again, talking about innovation, obviously Noosa, when we launched in 2010, we were bucking all of the trends as this, whole milk, full flavor yogurt. And from a brand perspective, somebody that wants to have fun and not take things too seriously. And so I think all of those things are still what we look to as we drive the business forward. And we know that yogurt still, from you look at other Western countries and per capita, Americans still eat a lot less yogurt. So trying to really understand how we can bring more day parts into that eating occasion is really how we're thinking about innovation. So we've got some exciting stuff launching this summer that really will, I think push, yogurt out of that just simple breakfast occasion.
I think it was the mango habanero. Is that right? One of the sweet heat combinations.
Raspberry habanero.
It could have been that. I was just like, I could eat this with some pita chips or something. This is delicious. As more than just eating with a spoon.
Yeah, and I mean that's been the great thing is we've been able to sort of push boundaries, but use Colorado as our test market. We've built such a great following here, and we've got such great retail partnerships and obviously awareness that it's allowed us to sort of push the boundaries of what people expect from yogurt and test and learn in a great market as we then, sort of get that proof of concept to take it out to the rest of the country. So it's been fun.
Now, we've got a few closing questions that we ask each of our guests. What's the best piece of advice that anyone's ever given you?
I really feel like I've been so fortunate on this sort of food journey that I've had so many people supporting me and sort of giving me that mentorship. But really the best piece of advice I've been given was from my boss at Izzy, and it was really encouraging me to just stop thinking and talking about it and just go out and do it. Because maybe I wouldn't have picked up that phone that second time going back to Australia to, get that recipe that really, allowed us to start all of this. But then I think about another great piece of advice as I really got into sort of the thick of the business, and that, again, we were this full fat, full flavor yogurt, and just talking to somebody that had sort of lived it and said, you know what, as a consumer good, you can't be all things to all people. And that was really, really helpful because, again, I was, out at the farmers market and getting so much input about like, well, have you thought about this? And you should do this. And that piece of advice really reminded me to stay true to what was fundamental to why we started the business, and that was making really good whole milk delicious yogurt and just staying true to that focus.
And I think both are so important, especially with building a brand and just as an entrepreneur in general, or just in life. Just stop thinking about it and go out and do it. And it takes guts to go make that second call after you're like, well, they didn't bring it up, so maybe I shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So is there a book that you'd like to recommend to people?
So I'm actually almost embarrassed to admit this, but I probably have read only a handful of books since I've launched Noosa. And one book I have read, and it wasn't business related, that I absolutely loved, my mom gave it to me, was called Penguin Bloom. And it's a story about this odd little bird who ultimately saves his family. And it's just a very moving, poignant but impactful story. And I think for me, it sort of reinforces that life is very precious, but that for me personally, to be successful, you need balance. So I would just say to anyone, I mean, read books that aren't just business focused, but, give you balance and give you perspective.
Now, this is the last question here. So this is a little tough, but if you could travel back in time to teach your pre-Noosa self something that you've since had to learn the hard way, what would that be?
I definitely am somebody that is very goes on my intuition. And there were a few moments early on when my gut, my intuition was like, that's not right for the brand, or that's not a good decision point. And maybe just, with different business partners sort of in the mix, wasn't vocal enough when I knew that deep down I was like, that is just the wrong to sort of decision point or path, and I feel like I'm fortunate that I was able to recognize that early on. So I would just say, really understand and trust your gut and your intuition, because 9 times out of 10, they're the right decision.
That's great advice. And thank you so much for coming on to the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you and just getting to hear about the success of Noosa and how, despite all the amazing success that you've had, you're still so down to earth. And I think that speaks truly to the brand and has done the brand very well.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
And where's the best place for people to go check out what Noosa has up next and what you guys are working on?
Definitely check out our website, Noosa Yoghurt, and that's yogurt with an H.com. But also follow us on Facebook and Instagram, because that's where we definitely will be teasing our fans with what's coming up this summer.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Koel.
Thanks.
Thank you all again so much for listening to the podcast. And if you guys are finding any value or enjoying what you're listening to, we would really appreciate if you go over to iTunes and give us your honest feedback in the ratings and reviews section. It would really help us out. So thank you all again, and we'll look forward to talking to you on the next episode.